You know something that I've been overdue to talk about with this? Antagonists. So I've talked about various elements and forces at play in the world. I've talked about creatures. I've talked about the magic system. I've talked about my main character. I have not talked about the antagonists yet. And I am choosing to use the words antagonists instead of villains. The reason being is that because of the scale of the story, which, as a reminder, is what I consider to be small stories in a big world, because it's not dealing with the grand movements, massive political, campaigns, military, any of that, it's not dealing with anything that is on the scale of like the villainous forces of darkness. No, I'm just dealing with the people who are in the way and are a hindrance to the main character and what he is trying to achieve, which, as a reminder, is basically just freedom. He's on the run. So I have two main, clearly antagonistic characters. And then there are other characters who I would describe as obstacles, not necessarily antagonists. The difference being the antagonists are actively working, like their goal involves capturing Ferris, stopping him and preventing him from what he's doing. Obstacle characters are characters who don't really care about the main character, at least until he crosses their paths, but they have the ability to be a problem for him, to stall him, to delay him, to keep him from reaching his goal. But they don't have their own goal that is at odds with his. The antagonists do. So I have two antagonists. I have what I consider to be the on-the-ground antagonist and then the mastermind. Now, those titles that I just sort of said makes it sound much more like the mastermind is going, oh, mwahaha, but the plan is coming together. And I went way out of my way to not write that character like that. But what we have is Garion, who is a character I have mentioned in some of the other diaries. He is a marshal, and he is also a half-Treshan. So his ability to hunt actually anybody, but especially elementals, is greatly heightened, which makes him more than just a standard tracker. He can just sense the magical energies that Ferris puts out and can zero in on him through that if he's close enough. So he is what is on the ground and actively pursuing Ferris. And then there is Professor Rains. Now, Professor Rains, I have not talked about yet. She is the professor of elemental humanism at Sagaris University, which is one of the institutions of the Science Guild. And she is a lab professor. She's not a lecturer. She is in a lab with grad students working on experiments and studying subjects, and that's the kind of professor she is. And she wants Ferris back, but she also won't pursue him through the means that would normally be available to her. Partly because the Science Guild doesn't really care. If the Science Guild loses a specimen, they've got others. If it's easy to get it back, sure, that's great. But otherwise, it's not worth expending the resources all that much. Professor Rains has a personal interest in Ferris, which I am not going to tell you what that is, but she has reason to want him back and to be willing to go off the books in order to do it. And that is why she's employing Garion. Now, Garion, as a marshal, can be employed through standard means, but he is working without a warrant in this case. So it's actually an illegal hunt. Even though Ferris is in danger from anybody who realizes that he's an elemental, and there are certainly plenty of authority figures who would look the other way at an elemental being detained, even without a warrant, that's still not how it's supposed to work. The marshals get warrants issued by various entities, be it the Science Guild, be it arbiters of the various cities. They are not supposed to be hunting anybody that they do not have a warrant for. And that's what Garion's doing. He's risking his entire career. He could lose his license to ever hunt a bounty again. All for Professor Rains so that she can have Ferris back. And she won't tell him why. She doesn't want anyone to know that she's doing this. And the motives and the reasons are things that are delved into later in the book. So I'm not going to go into those. But the main thing here is because this is a smaller story, even though I can't tell you what the specific motivation is, it was very important for me that Professor Rains had a personal driving motivation. Not only to go after Ferris, but to do it in an underhanded way and to keep the fact that she is doing this from those who oversee her, from her superiors. It was important to me that she be that invested in what she's doing, that she be willing to go to those extremes. Because for who she is, these are extremes. This is not behavior you'd expect from a professor of decent standing within something like the Science Guild. So there's that. And with Garion, the main thing with him was just basically having the closest thing I'm willing to make to a one-man army in this book. He is the best at what he does, which makes him the physical threat. Whereas Professor Rains is the threat of will and determination. We already know the degree to which he's willing to go to get a hold of Ferris. So there obviously is a drive there that is scary. Whereas with Garion, the drive, or what makes him scary is much more what he can physically do. Professor Rains is not a physical threat, especially not to an elemental. She doesn't have abilities of her own. She can get a hold of equipment to try and neutralize an elemental, but she's not a field agent. That's not what she's for. That's not what she can do. She can't be a physical threat. But somebody needs to be. It's kind of like how in a lot of James Bond movies, the person who is doing the big scheme that Bond has to thwart is usually somebody who is very intellectual, has the idea, does the planning, but there is almost always a henchman that is the physical threat. It is possible to create a single villain that is both a physical and intellectual threat, but it's not uncommon to break that up into two separate entities, partly just because it frees you up a little bit. Because to try and have one character pull too much weight, it can make it hard to balance and hard to make work in the narrative. So I can have Professor Rains being at the university while Garion is out hunting. And that enables me to cut back to her, to deal with her and her mind and what she's thinking and how she's going about trying to get what she wants. Whereas with Garion, I deal with the pursuit. And I'm not trying to get the same thing across with both characters. Now, as I said, there are other obstacles as well. There's the constabulary in Torvek, which is the city where most of the story takes place. So there are the constables, including a few named ones, such as Sergeant Harmon, who is a recurring named character. There's the general hazards of a city, just pickpockets and disturbances and not knowing your way around, just getting lost in the streets. These are all obstacles. But I just wanted to talk a little bit about my villains, the roles that they play, and how I kind of went about figuring out their place in this story. And that'll do for this one, I think. So, villains. In my case, 2, because I didn't want a Dark Lord who was going to have an army of minions. I can come up with other obstacles besides these two without having to resort to that. What are your thoughts on what I've said, or any thoughts you have on this whole process as we continue to move our way towards publication? Whatever they are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Usual stuff, you know what it is. The Kickstarter for this book is currently up and running. So if you want to help ensure that it gets published in the best shape that it could possibly be in, please check out that Kickstarter, link in the description. Plus, there's links to other things as well, my social media, my Patreon, etc., etc., etc. No real pressure, though, because we like to take a relaxed attitude around here. So just come on back next time you need a break.